Shabbat Shalom. Happy Sabbath. Again, this morning we are thankful beyond words that Yah has spared our lives, and we are here to give him thanks for what he has done for us. I would like to open the word of Yah this morning to introduce our subject, and the book in question is Qoheleth. Qoheleth. That's the book of Ecclesiastes, and we will dilate upon the first chapter, and we will read from verse 7. All the rivers run into the sea, yet the sea never overflows. To the place from which the rivers come, there they return again. All matters are wearisome. No one is able to speak of it. The eye is not satisfied with seeing, nor the ear filled with hearing. What has been is what shall be. What has been done is what shall be done, and there is none new under the sun. And so I read that to introduce our subject this morning, the prophecy of Hannukah. Hannukah. We want to look at that because the annual festival of Hannukah is celebrated by Jews the world over to commemorate the victory of the Maqqabim people in their victory over the Seleucid king who reigned over them during that particular time. And so rabbinic literature canonizes the event, particularly that aspect of it, where it is said that the oil in the lamp was able to last 8 days instead of the one night. But I believe that Hannukah is more profound than that, and we aim this morning to look at that. Look at Hannukah, because no analysis of that festival can be complete unless we talk about the Hellenization of Israel, and today perhaps it's the Hellenization of the world. And what do I really mean by that? When we talk about the Hellenization of the world, we are talking about the Greek culture that had begun after the conquest of Alexander the Great in the 4th century, in that his generals went to different places and they conquered the areas of the world, including India and Greece itself, obviously, Egypt, and many other parts. And so the Greek culture was so vibrant that they began teaching the world everything about them. And clearly they gave us democracy, which is still part of the Hellenization of the world. And perhaps nothing is more illustrative of that fact than what happened in Britain on the 29th of November 2024, which was yesterday. in the sense that we learned that the British Parliament, Westminster Parliament, voted to approve assisted dying. Assisted dying. Some call it mercy killing. It is the practice of deliberate hastening a person's death. This is a practice that was quite prevalent, as we know, in Greece and in Rome in ancient time. We studied only a few weeks ago that hemlock was employed to hasten the death of a person during the practice of euthanasia. And Socrates, one of their great philosophers, suffered his death in that way. Plato, his student, was also in agreement with that. But I am inclined to concur with Aquinas, Thomas Aquinas, who believed that euthanasia is against natural laws. It's a violation of the commandment in the sense that the sixth commandment comes with an imperative: thou shalt not kill. So yesterday, 330 members of parliament voted to approve it, whereas 225 voted against it. Now you've got to understand the context of this and why I'm raising this, because we are dealing with Hannukah, and we're going to see in a minute how Antiochus Epiphanes, that Seleucid king who ruled over the people at that time, how he went into the temple of Yah and brought in his teachings and his idols as part of that process of Hellenization. That's why one of the reasons I'm raising it at this moment. So we have a situation here where the sixth commandment comes with an imperative saying, thou shalt not kill. And the British Parliament has decided that it's okay. We will legitimize it. We will pay no attention to what the creator of the universe is saying. The rationale is, or the irony of the rationale is this: they are trying to avoid suffering of the person who is sick. That's their argument. But the reality is this: in so doing, or in the attempt to do that, they have placed their own souls in suffering, awaiting the judgment of Yah. Because the commandment says, thou shalt not kill. And so you are leading other people to create death on themselves, while your own souls who have done that are now placed in that position where you will have to answer to the Creator. And so I ask them, the scientists, the politicians, and the doctors, if life is a gift from Yah, is it not the prerogative of Yah to determine when a man is born and at the same time what time he will depart? It's a gift from Yah, not from medicine, but from the Creator. How dare you ingratiate yourselves into the prerogatives of the divine? Am I therefore to ask, are you now become one of them? So if that's so, and you have made yourself, declared yourself gods, there must be a flaming sword to guard the people of Yah. And one cannot doubt that Yah will put that flaming sword to guard his people. We know that Britain is a constitutional monarchy. We know that. We understand that. And it devolves power to Parliament. The king, he reigns, but he doesn't rule. That is Charles III, currently. And he's also head of the Church of England. And so one wonders whether the people, the king himself and others, whether they do not think this is an immoral act that will invoke the wrath of Yah upon the nation. We have to ask those questions. What does the church say in this matter? And so we are watching the mixing, the Hellenization of the world, and people are not really seeing what is happening. They're not making sense of what is going on in their lives. And so let's turn to the book we call Maccabees, a book of Maccabees. Of course, I'm reading here from the Alleluia scriptures, which is somewhat different from your King James. So we want to look at the Maccabean revolution, the revolt, and how it happened and what precipitated it. We want to look at that. When you read your King James and you get to the book of Malachi, the last book in the Torah, the Old Testament, you recognize that Elam or Persia is in rule. But when you turn to the next page, you come to the book of Matthew. And there is a chasm in terms of years that have elapsed that the King James doesn't cover. So between Malachi and Matthew, we lose 400 years. And it is that period of time that we're dealing with in the book of Maccabees, that period of time that Greece ruled and the process of Hellenization had taken place and continues on the world's obsession with democracy. As we studied a couple of weeks ago, that Socrates died because he questioned certain principles relating to the Athenian democracy. So come with me to chapter 1 of Maccabee, the word here says, and it came to be after Alexandros, son of Philippos. Now, in your Bible, it would say Alexander and Philip. We're talking about King Philip here of Macedonia. That's who we're dealing with. The Macedonian who came out of the land of Kittim, which is near Cyprus, had smitten Darius, sovereign of Paris and Mede, that's the Medes and the Persians, that he reigned in his place the first over Yawan. He reigned over Greece. I'm repeating these things because obviously they're different in your Bible. Verse 2, and he fought many battles and won many strongholds and slew the sovereigns of the earth. And he went through to the ends of the earth and took spoils and many nations, so that the earth was at rest before him. Therefore he was exalted, and his heart was lifted up. We're talking about the venerated Alexander the Great, who was tutored by Aristotle, who was tutored by Plato, who was tutored by Socrates. This young man here, as we've studied his history, at 16, he was put in place of Macedonia, 16 years old. He had a military upbringing. At 18, he was in charge of a cavalry. And at 20 years old, he became king when his father was assassinated. That's this young man here we're dealing with here in the Word of Yah. And Yah puts him before us this morning so that we may take auditory view of him. And it must have a visionary impact on our senses as we studied him. The word says that he conquered many nations, and during that period of time, his heart was lifted up. He became pompous, impudent. That's how he was. And he gathered very mighty army and ruled over countries and a nation and sovereign and became tributary to him. And after these events, he fell sick and perceived that he would die. Now, this ought to be required reading in Congress, in the Senate, in Westminster Parliament, and in all the parliaments of the world. That it's not the weapons of our warfare that protects the people. We sing this morning, faith in Yeshua. That is the victory. And we're told by the apostle that whenever we go fighting, we must first put on what? Truth. We must gird our loins with truth. Put on that helmet of salvation. And then the breastplate of righteousness. That's how we fight. Because we're not fighting against flesh and blood, but principalities and powers. They are in high places. but they're using the people. They are using the people in politics and elsewhere, even in religion, if only they knew it. And so this case study this morning is Alexander the Great. Because so often we see the contemporary Alexander the Great. He comes on TV, and we watch the news, and we see the Exocet missiles. We see the smart bomb. We hear very much about the nuclear weapons that this country has, and the stealth bomber, and that bomber, and how they can evade radars of the different countries. Alexander the Great did all that. But the word says that after a while his heart was lifted up and he conceived. He saw, he knew that he would die. He died in 323 BC. He was not even 40 years old. But his heart was lifted up. And the word says that, let's come to verse 7. So Alexander reigned 12 years and he died. He reigned 12 years and he died. In the American context, that means he would have served 3 terms. In the British context, he would have served 2 terms and a half. He died. And his servants ruled each one in his place. Nothing new under the sun, Solomon says, king. They're just repeating, replicating all that he did. Even today, that is being done as we speak. And after his death, they all put crowns upon themselves, as did their sons after them, many years, and evils were multiplied in the earth. And the word says, and a wicked root came up out of them, Antiochus, also called Epiphanes, son of Antiochus the Sovereign, who had been a hostage in Rome. He had grown up in Rome. He had been there, so he learned certain things. But he was now ruling in the Seleucid dynasty. This is the history of this thing. You don't see this, as I indicated, in the King James. But it's captured here for our attention to look at and to understand. And it goes on that he reigned in the 137th year of the reign of the Yawanites. That's the Greek. In those days, wicked men went out of Israel, who persuaded many, saying, let us go and make a covenant with the Gentiles that are around us, for since we departed from them, we have had much sorrow. Wicked men. These are Jews. They said, let's go and make a covenant with the heathens. Let's go and make a covenant with the Gentiles. And you see that happening today. Often people who you expect to know better are aligning themselves with certain camps, certain beliefs, certain system that is inconsistent with that which they claim to believe. Not precluding the church. The church, which is supposed to be a gateway to the kingdom. For example, again, we must make reference to what took place at Mount Sinai when Yah spoke morality to the people He said, we shall have no other Yah but him. That's what he said. He also said that man should not commit adultery. The nation says that it's all right to commit adultery. Men in power, in authority, in politics, and elsewhere have decided it's all right not to listen to Yah. They have legitimized not listening to Yah. And perhaps you're asking yourself, what's gone wrong? Is everybody drinking hemlock? How could you think like that? He who existed before we existed, and it's because of his existence why we exist, we are now living as if we are the subject of our own existence. And so this Antiochus Epiphanes, he was on mission to make the world Greek. And so wicked men decided to join with him. Verse 13, and some of the people were so bold in this that they went to the sovereign who gave them authority to do according to the laws of the Gentiles. Do whatever the Gentiles are doing. Do what the heathens are doing. Now, let's break there because the season is coming up for this. When we read in the book of Jeremiah, chapter 10, it is made graphically clear to us that we must not follow the ways of the Gentiles, the ways of the heathens. What do? Jeremiah tells us that they go into the forest and they cut down a tree, an evergreen tree, and they deck it, put nails on it and decorate it, and they celebrate it. In our day, they call it Christmas. It's coming up in a few weeks' time. The word says, do not do what the heathens do. Don't do it. But even people who say they believe in Yeshua are doing this. And again, I ask myself, is everybody drinking hemlock? Are we all drinking hemlock? Why this is happening? And if you were to use the word in the context of 2 Timothy 3:16 as a doctrine and to correct and to reprove, they will tell you that my church, my denomination doesn't believe that. And perhaps the appropriate question to ask would be, is your church, is your pastor a created being or is he a God? Because here the Creator speaks and you're saying that you don't believe it. So watch this young man here called Antiochus. Come with me to verse 14 of the same passage, chapter 1. So they built a place of training in Jerusalem according to the customs of the Gentile. They're now following Gentile. They have abandoned the way of Yah, even as our contemporary culture seems to have done, and made themselves as uncircumcised and forsook the Kodesh covenant. Notice how deliberate I am. I'm not using the word holy because that is linked to and is associated with the Greek god Helios. But the Hebrew is Kodesh. So it's the Kodesh covenant, and joined themselves to the Gentile and were sold to do evil. Now, when the reign was established before Antiochus, he thought to reign over Mizraim, that's Egypt, that he might have the rule of two reigns. Therefore, he entered into Mitzrayim with a great multitude, with chariots and elephants and horsemen and great fleet, and fought against Ptolemaeus, sovereign of Mitzrayim. But Ptolemaeus was afraid of him and fled, and many were wounded in the slain. And that's kind of the attitude today. When we have a strong leader somewhere and he has more bombs than the other nation, that weak nation is afraid and run away. And so he annexes, whether that's ideologically or physically. A lot of annexing is taking place in our world by way of the infectiousness of the cultures. The dominant culture infects a less dominant culture, and the people begin to practice those principles in that dominant culture. That's what we're dealing with in the Hellenization of our world, even as we look at the subject here this morning, the prophecy of Hannukah. So come with me to verse 21. Well, let's do 20 first. And after Antiochus had smitten Mizraim, he returned again in the 143rd year and went up against Yisrael and Jerusalem with a great multitude. And he entered proudly in the Mikdash and took away the golden altar. He went into the temple. That's arrogance. That's rude. That's disrespect. That's foolish. Very unwise. But he went in and he took away the golden altar and the lampstand of light and all its utensils. Now, this is Antiochus Epiphanes. You would have thought that he had read the memoirs of Belshazzar, who before him did exactly the same in chapter 5 of Daniel, and at that very night lost his life when that bloodless hand came and wrote upon the wall. I wonder whether the nations are seeing it. Meeny, meeny, tickler parson, you have been found wanton, weighed. Of course, you have been weighed in the balance. But of course, we're living in a world where there is gross darkness, and I mean ignorance, covering the land, and therefore they're not seeing. They are not seeing. And so he did exactly what Nebuchadnezzar had done, but give him some credit, Nebuchadnezzar, because he put these things in storage. Whereas Belshazzar took them out and began to drink liquor out of them. And so Antiochus here did exactly that. And the word says, and the table of the showbread and the bowls of pouring and the vessel. Now, as you read that, you don't have to conjecture where exactly he was. Because as you go into the temple, you're moving from east to west, you pass the brazen altar, you get to the laver, and then you go through the first curtain, and then you go into the holy place, and on the right you would see the showbread, and on the south side you would see the menorah, the lampstand. And so we know exactly as we read it, exactly where Antiochus is in the holy place. And it's only the priest is not a priest. So he's violating the principles here. And so that is what is happening here as we read that. And the word says in verse 23, he also took the silver and the gold and the precious vessel. He also took the hidden treasures which he found. And when he had taken all away, he went to his own land, having made a great slaughter and spoken very proudly. Therefore, there was a great mourning in Israel in every place where they were. Great mourning. He had created havoc in the Hellenization of the world, including Israel. And I don't want you to miss the point that exactly what you're seeing right now. We're spreading democracy, but we're adding some things in there that were common in Greece and in Rome, and we're going to impose them on the people, even as they were imposed then by Antiochus. It's a prophecy, and prophecy is a cycle, and Solomon wants you to know that whatever had happened in the past will happen even to the end of time, if only the people have eyes to see the reality of it. It goes beyond politics. It goes beyond that. And so we must understand that. And of course, when this is happening, there are always going to be people who are concerned and people who are sighing and are crying, and none did more sighing and crying than the Maccabees family at that particular time. So if we skip on to verse 38, it says, so that the inhabitants of Jerusalem fled because of them. Therefore, the city was made a dwelling of foreigners and became foreign to those that were born in her, and their own children left her. We're talking here about the time of trouble that is coming. So I'm trying to make that connection. So if you understand the past, you will be prepared for that which is coming. But it's gradual. And you must never read the word of Yah with a veil over your eyes. He's letting you know that that which you see happen, because the word says in Matthew 24, when you see the abomination of desolation spoken of by the prophet Daniel, it's time to move. It's time to leave the city. It's time to leave the church. When you see abomination taking place in the churches, it's time to leave. That's the word of Yah. Who spoke? Yeshua. Now, what is an abomination? Something that offends Yah and sends a stench to his nostril. And we know one of the abominations that the word here speaks of is when two people of the same gender find themselves in a situation where they are not supposed to do as if it was a man and a woman. Yah said that to him is an abomination. Is it in the churches? The word says yes, and the reality of the culture says it's in there. Yah said when you see the abomination of desolation spoken of by Daniel, it's time to flee. It's time to leave. That's what the word is saying. So it says, her mikdash was laid waste like a wilderness. Her feast were turned into mourning. Her Shabbatot into reproach. Her honor into contempt. As had been her esteem, so was her dishonor increased, and her excellency was turned into mourning. And sovereign Antiochus wrote to his whole reign that all should be one people. Did you hear me? He's not writing to them and saying, I want to make everybody in the world Greek. In essence, that's what he's saying. We must be one people, and everyone should leave his laws, so all the Gentiles agreed according to the command of the sovereign. Probably you've heard other people talk about a one world order. It was tried here by Antiochus Epiphanes. Whatever happened in the past will happen again. He tried it to bring everybody together. Everybody should give up their beliefs. That's why you hear people saying today, oh, you got to be tolerant. You must be tolerant to them, but they're not tolerant to what you believe. So they want to bring everybody into a category where you have no voice. And your elected official will speak for you and will determine when you're born and when you die. I beg to suggest that the prerogative of deity, of Yah. Come, let us make man in our own image. That's what he said. So, am I to assume that the medics, that they have become like us, meaning Yah, Son, and Ruach? Are we to assume that? It will never happen. It cannot happen. Only Yah can give life, and only Yah should take life. And so Antiochus here is saying that the people should give up and become as one people. Let's be one. And whoever doesn't listen to what he's saying, hear me, they should die. They should die. Let's read it again for emphasis. Verse 41. And sovereign Antiochus wrote to his whole reign, to his kingdom, to the people, that all should be one, and everyone should leave his laws. So all the Gentiles agree according to the command of the sovereign. Even many of the Israelites also agreed. Even the believers in the church are agreeing to his belief, and slaughtered to idols and profaned the Sabbath. Did you hear me? They profaned the Sabbath. When you don't keep the Sabbath, whether you're at home or not, and you're doing your own thing, speaking your own word, you are profaning the Sabbath. And it carries a death warrant. It's a capital offense. I don't care who you are. The word says, when you profane it, remember the seventh day to keep it holy. Did I say holy? I mean Kodash. Remember the seventh day to keep it Kodash. And you are behaving as if it wasn't stated here. For the sovereign had sent letters to messenger to Jerusalem and to the cities of Judah, that they should follow the foreign laws of the land and forbid burnt offerings and slaughtering and drink offering. Don't keep the feast days. Don't do that. Don't do it. Don't keep the Sabbath. And so he polluted the Mikdash, the temple, and the Kodesh people. He polluted them. He says, put up altars and Asherim and temples of idol. What he did, the word is letting you know, the Maccabee here is letting you know that where Yah's altar was, he took that down and put up his own altar, the altar of Zeus. He put up the altar of Zeus in the temple in Jerusalem. And when you read Revelation chapter 2, the word said in the message to Pergamum, Yeshua says that is where Satan's seat dwelleth. And so Satan's seat was in Pergamum. And years later, in the 19th century, a German engineer who was in Turkey excavating found Satan's seat and took it to Germany, to Berlin. And even as we speak now, Satan's seat, a literal seat, is in the museum in Berlin. want you to know that. So that was happening then, and the people had polluted themselves by joining with the Gentiles, even as that is happening in the many different denominations today. That is happening. And so we ask ourselves, what can be done? And this is why we are studying this, to gain some more knowledge, so that we too can be courageous enough, like the Maccabees and the children of Issachar, to know how to respond in these last days of Earth's history. Yes, how we should behave in the last days of Earth's history. So come with me now to verse 52. It says, then many of the people were gathered to them, that is, everyone that forsook the law. They apostatized. Those who mixed with the Gentiles, who were once believers, who have apostatized, joined with the Gentiles, and they were now together. So they committed evil in the land. You were once baptized, and you were a keeper of Yah's command, and you no longer do that. You are in a state of apostasy. You're gradually moving your way towards the lake of fire. That's how it is. You who once knew what was expected of you when you left, you're moving towards the lake of fire. And you have joined with the man who doesn't want to know. That's the group here. The word in Jeremiah says, when the righteous man forgets his righteousness and gives it up, and turns to do wickedly, none of his righteousness will be remembered. And likewise, when the man who is known to be prevalent in doing wrongs, but he turns away from his wrongful acts and turns to righteousness, none of his wrong deeds will be remembered. That's the word of Yah. Verse 52, then many of the people were gathered to them, that is, everyone that forsook the law, and so many committed evils in the land, and drove the Israelite into hiding places. They could not worship anymore publicly. They had to go in their homes, in the bushes, in this period of time of the Maccabees. People today, they say, well, you know, I don't like house churches. You know, I prefer these grand edifices. You couldn't go to the temple during that time, because many of the temple dwellers, they joined with the heathens. That's what happened. And the word is letting us know this is going to come to fruition again. It's going to be fulfilled again. That those of you who don't like house churches, one day you may just have to. That is, if you want to worship. Because you may just take the easy way out and join with the heathens. So the word says, now on the 15th day, I'm reading verse 54 of chapter 1. Now on the 15th day of the month of Kislev, in the 145th year, they put up the abomination of desolation. This is the image of Zeus upon the altar, and built altars throughout the cities of Judah on every side. And to burn incense at the doors of the houses and in the streets. And when they had torn in pieces the books of the law, did you hear me? They ripped up the books of the law, the book of Deuteronomy. They ripped it up. Now, people are not doing that literally today, but politicians are ripping up the laws of Yah by way of the laws that they legislate in Parliament. They're ripping it up. And they are causing the people to join with the heathens to go against Yah. If only the people could see that. Thou shalt not kill. They say, yeah, you can kill. Thou shalt not commit adultery. They say, oh, it's all right, this is a free society, and you can express yourself in any way you choose. This is a free country. Whose world is it? David says, the earth is Yah, and the fullness thereof, and all that dwell in it. And he has sent his constitution, we call the scripture, to tell us how to live within it. And now you have a second being coming to say, now you can live anyhow. In essence, what the politicians and the judges and the lawyers and all are saying, did Yah really say that? Well, we heard that all the way back in Genesis chapter 3 when Satan asked Adam the same thing. Did Yah really say? Yes, he did. It's my short answer to your long question. He did. And so we're seeing here that they ripped up the books of the law, which they found, they burned them, just like they did in France years ago. And they called that the period of the Enlightenment, the Renaissance. And whoever was found with the book of the covenant, did you hear me? Whoever was found with the book of the covenant, or if any adhered to the law, the sovereign's command was that they should be put to death. Now, this happened in England too. And so you had Wycliffe and men like that who struggled to get the Bible printed in the ordinary language of the people. And the government there were waiting at the ports to make sure that no Bible would come into England. And people would say to you, but that was then. No, I'm talking about yesterday. Yesterday. They voted. They voted in a way that sent a stench to Yah's nostril, saying it is all right to take a person's life. So in essence, what are they doing? They're burning the laws. They're burning it. This is the spiritual application of that which was done physically in years gone past. That's what is happening. So the word says, now on the 25th day of the month, they slaughtered on the idol altar, which was upon the altar of Elohim. Did you see that? The altar of Elohim was subsumed underneath their altar. At which time, according to the command, they put to death some women that had allowed their children to be circumcised. In that culture, in the Hebrew culture, the young men were circumcised at 8 days old. And it was then that some of them would be named 8 days old. Circumcision today of the heart is through baptism. So, in essence, anyone who was circumcised and they found that you were circumcised, because that was the culture of the Hebrew, they want to wipe out your culture. Give you different names. That's why when Daniel went to Babylon, they called him Belshazzar. They gave them different names. Those of us who are of the bronze origin of Africa and Shemitic Negroes, we don't wear our own names. That's what colonialism did and imperialism did. Change our names and give us different cultures. Many of us don't remember anything about Africa. That is the Greco-Roman culture. This is the Hellenization of the world. We wear other people's names. You see a man going down the street, and he's as bronze as they come. And if you were to ask him his name, someone would most likely say, oh, that's Mr. White. Mr. White? You mean that bronze man? Oh, yes, he's Mr. White. Not his name at all. That's his slave master's name. I say this only to repudiate the notion that we can just run roughshod over the word of Yah and pay no attention to what he says. And so the culture is doing no less, but perhaps more than Antiochus Epiphanes did. They wanted to erase, postpone the culture, the Hebrew culture. And everybody now must speak Greek. Everybody. And you see that happening in various countries now. Those of us who are from the island, perhaps from Excamaker, we once spoke Spanish. And before that, we spoke the Ghanaian dialects. But today, we don't know anything about that because colonialism gave us this clipped King's English. And it's a deviation, an aberration from what Genesis talks about. Because we're told that Nimrod, even at the time that he was building that Tower of Babel, it said the world had one language. The world spoke Hebrew. So when the language was confused, we developed languages and dialects. So I beg to suggest even English is a derivative of Babylon. It's in the word. Let's read on. And so let's unfold this apostasy that many believers took part in. And obviously, Matthias was very angry with what had transpired and decided that, you know, he was not going to allow the people to get him to be complicit in what was going on. And so he was going to fight. He was going to fight. And so they did. Maccabee chapter 2, First Maccabee chapter 2. And the word says, and when many of the Yisrael came to them, Mattiyahu and his son, this is the father of Judah Maccabee and his other brothers, when they came to him, then the sovereign officers answered and spoke to Mattiyahu in this day, you are a ruler and an honorable and great man in this city, and strengthened with sons and brothers. Now, therefore, you come first and complete the sovereign's command, as all the Gentiles have done, and also the men of Yehudah, and those who remain at Jerusalem, so you and your house shall be in the number of the sovereign's friend. And you and your children shall be honored with silver and gold and many rewards. In other words, they came to him, they recognized that this man and his family, they're like Joshua. As for me and my house, we don't care what you're going to do, but we're going to serve Yah. But they said to him, If you just obey what the king says, we will make it worth your while. Silver and gold will be yours, and you'll be well off. That chariot you wanted, oh, we'll give it to you. Horse, oh yeah, well, you could be part of the equestrian order. Anything you want, we'll give it to you. Just obey the king. Just be tolerant with what we're trying to do. Because we want to make everybody like us. That's what they said to him. Now, therefore, you come first and complete the sovereign's command as all the Gentiles have done. Verse 19. Then Matthias answered and spoke with a loud voice. He didn't whisper. Though all the nations that are under the sovereign's reign obey him, and everyone falls away from the belief of their fathers and gives consent to his command, still my sons and my brothers and I will walk in the covenant of our fathers. Elohim forbid that we should forsake the Torah and the law. We will not listen to the sovereign's word to go from our belief either to the right hand or to the left. Now, when he had finished speaking those words, one of the Yehudim came in the sight of all to offer on the altar, which was a moedim, according to the sovereign's command. When Matthias saw this matter, he turned with ardor and trembled within. Neither could he refrain to show his wrath according to the righteousness. Therefore, he ran and slew him upon the altar. And at that time, he also killed the sovereign's commissioner who compelled the men to offer, and he pulled down the altar. Now, this is zeal. This is what we call righteous indignation. This is not raw, unexpurgated anger as we know it in the world. That's not it. This is righteous indignation. And reference it here made to who? To the book of Numbers. It's here. It says, thus he dealt with order for the law of Elohim as Phinehas. You remember Phinehas when Balaam was trying to get the children of Israel to participate in the wrongdoing of the king of Balak, and when they got to Baal Pehor, how they intermingled with the people, and they had brought a Midianitish woman into the tabernacle in the face of Moses, and Phinehas took his sword and shoved it through the man who and the woman were being intimate in the camp. And so it's likened that, and the word says that Phinehas had stayed the wrath of Yah. And so when we see these kind of abomination in the temples, in the churches, in the synagogue, and we sit there and we say nothing, the implication here is that by saying nothing, you have allowed the plague to continue in the church, in the assemblies, in your own. You need to say something. You need to be a Phinehas. You need to be like Matthias. You need to be like Judah Maccabee. You need to be like that family. You cannot claim to be a custodian of truth. And you see, truth is being trodden underfoot by people you know in the same assembly that you worship, and you just stay aside and say nothing. It's an abomination. It's there. It's there. So at this time, we need to go to the book of Yohanan, chapter 10. And I want to address those people who have ears to hear, but they're not hearing. Yohanan, that's John chapter 10, and the word says, truly, truly, I say to you, he who does not enter through the door into the sheepfold, but climbs up by another way, that one is a thief and a robber. If you're not obeying the word of Yah, and you're not doing what Yah says, you're a thief. You're trying to steal through the window into the kingdom, and there's only one door. Noah, when you build a ark, build one door. Moses, when you build a tabernacle, build one door. Let the people approach it from the east going west. One door. There is no other name, Acts 4:12, in heaven, below heaven, anywhere else where a man might be saved. The conference cannot save you. There is no value except righteousness in being simply a member of a church. None. One door. Don't climb up theologically, doctrinally, religiously through the window. Don't do it. Come through the door. But he who enters through the door is the shepherd of the sheep. Is that what he says? Is the shepherd of the sheep. The doorkeeper opens for him, and the sheep hear his voice, and he calls his own sheep by name and leads them out. Everybody else who doesn't go through, the word says that they are what? Hirelings. They're hirelings. They're hirelings. So we just need to understand that. We've got to understand the word of Yah and make sure that we obey him. We must. And so we're going to look at the book of Daniel, and specifically, we're going to do chapter 9. So, of course, we understand that after Jeremiah had spoken to the children of Israel many times, and other prophets had done the same, they had not listened at all, so they now find themselves in Babylon. Babylon. And so he's here, Daniel is here, reading the book of Jeremiah, and he realizes that the chastisement of 70 years that were placed on them is almost up, and it's almost time to go home. He said, wait a minute, and he starts counting. He said, well, we've been here quite a while now. It's almost 70 years. So we're going to pray. And he starts praying. Chapter 9, come with me. In the first year of Darius, the son of Ahasuerus, of the seed of the Madites, who was appointed as sovereign over the reign of Cashdites, Daniel wants you to know that at this time, Darius is ruling. And at that time, in the first year of his reign, Daniel observed from the scriptures the number of years. The scriptures he read was Jeremiah chapter 25. According to the word of Yahweh given to Jeremiah, the Nabi, the prophet, for the completion of the waste of Jerusalem would be 70 years. So I turned my face towards Yahweh, the Elohim, to seek by prayer and supplications in fasting and sackcloth and ashes, and I prayed to Yahweh, my Elohim, and made confession and said, O Yahweh, great and awesome, El, regarding the covenant and the kindness of those who love him, and to those who guard his command, we have sinned. Daniel is not complicit in this, but he takes responsibility for it. He said, we have sinned. We, corporate we have sinned. He now understands in great depth and intensity why Israel was taken to Babylon. I wonder if the bronze people, our people, really understand why slavery was. Deuteronomy 28 tells us that we had moved away from Yahweh. We had stopped being the people that we once were. Slavery. I know it's hard to swallow. But in that book, in Deuteronomy, Yah says, if you obey me, you'll be all right. There are blessings and cursing in here. Choose blessing. He said, if you don't, I will bring you back to Egypt in ships. Egypt in this context means bondage. And it's reasonable to ask the question, which other group of people came to America into bondage in ships other than our own? So when we're talking about slavery, please don't just start in the 16th and 17th century. Let's go back. We are people who knew Yah, are people who met with King Solomon, are people who hobnobbed with King David, Cushi, the Benjamite, Cushi, Zephaniah, all of these men, Solomon, Sheba. Shall I go on? These people who knew Yah, the same Ethiopian who pulled Jeremiah out of the dungeon to save his life. And after that, Jeremiah went to stay with the people in Egypt, black people. It's in the word. When we abandon Yah, Yah said, I will bring you back in bondage in ships. But like Daniel, Baruch said, while they are in the place of their captivity, while they're in America, while they're in Britain, while they're all over the place, even in Brazil, where the slaves went, they will remember. They will remember me. And they will come to their senses, like the prodigal, come to his senses. We have mixed and meddled with pigs for far too long. Have we not? There were times when we became so hungry that we wish we could eat with the pigs. But the pigs would not share their meal with us. It's time to come home to Yah. And so Daniel started praying. And he prayed. And one of the things about prayer, it's not about the ability to string sentences together grammatically. That's not what it is. It's about being honest with Yah. He starts, we have sinned. We don't even mention the word sin anymore. Somebody commits an adultery, we say that he has an extramarital affair. We have two people of the same sex in a relationship. We used to say they're happy. We say they're gay. And that's how we speak. A man is telling lies repeatedly. We say he misspoke. And so the language has become hybridized. It's changed over time. The culture has changed. And we don't know where up is or down is anymore. Up is down and down is up. Right is wrong and wrong is right. And in fact, there is no wrong. It's just a matter of perspective. They say, just be tolerant. And we don't know how to distinguish between blue and pink, except by our own feelings. And feelings are the most unreliable thing we carry around. Is it not? You're not feeling well. Feeling says, you know what? Let me take a drink today and let tomorrow's headache take care of itself. That's feelings. Principles say, wine is a mocker. Strong drink is raging. If you are deceived by it, you're not wise. And our feelings overwhelm us. So Daniel is praying. And Daniel says, we're bringing this to a close. It says, as he's praying, someone came to him. Someone came to him. And that person who came to him, that being who came to him, was Gabriel. And the word said he flew in. And this is where people get the notion that angels have wings. But we're talking about the swiftness here. And we sometimes get mixed up in comparing the angel here to the seraphims and the cherubim, which we know have wings. They're different creatures. Different creatures altogether. And so he's praying and he's being honest. And he is expressing his sorrow. Remember, Daniel is one of those who were commended. But because he knows better, he takes the responsibility for what had happened. And he's saying, we, Adonai, to us, shameth face, to our sovereigns, to our heads, and to our fathers, because we have sinned against you. We have sinned against you. And he's doing this repeatedly. I wish we could have this attitude. Verse 17, and now, our Elohim, hear the prayer of your servant and his supplication, and for the sake of Yahweh, cause your face to shine on your mikdash, which is laid waste. Come back into your temple. Come back. You've been away for a while. And we have been exiled from the faith. Oh, my Elohim, verse 18, incline your ear and hear, open your eyes and see our waste and the city which is called by your name, for we do not present our supplication before you because of our righteous deeds, but because of your great compassion. That's how we come. We have no righteousness except the filthy rags, Isaiah says. O Yahweh, hear, O Yahweh, forgive. O Yahweh, listen and act. Do not delay. Verse 20. Now, this is how we pray. Verse 20 says, and while I was speaking and praying and confessing my sin and the sin of my people, Israel, and presenting my supplication before Yahweh, my Elohim, for the Kodesh mountain of my people, while I was still speaking in my prayer, the man Gabriel, he had just uttered the word to Yah, please hear us. And before he was through speaking, Gabriel was detached. Wow. He said, Gabriel, the man whom I had seen in the vision at the beginning, came close to me in the swift flight about the time of the evening offering, and he made me to understand and talk with me and said, oh, Daniel, I have now come forward to make you wise concerning understanding. I want you to understand it, even as we need to understand it. At the beginning of your supplication, a word went out, and I have come to make known. Yah had decreed that very moment that Daniel was praying, say, go now and deal with him. Explain to him. Let him understand. So consider the word of understanding. Consider the word and understand the vision. 70 weeks are determined for thy people. 71. Remember, these weeks are weeks of years. 70 weeks are determined for thy people. Understand where I'm going with this. Because my subject is what? My subject is the prophecy of Hannukah. And I want you to know that you perhaps know this anyway. In the Hindu religion, they have a festival called the Festival of Light, called Diwali. They celebrate it every year, this Festival of Light. And a number of other cultures have the same thing. And the reason I conjecture here and infer this, that I believe it's the same thing. Why? Here are two reasons. When I read the book of Esther and I see chapter 1 and it talks about King Ahasuerus, at that time when Queen Esther was on the throne, the empire stretched from Ethiopia to India, Urdu. That means the people of that kingdom were largely bronze people like myself. And if the Hebrew among them were keeping the feast days, they would have been doing the same thing. So I conjecture that the people, the Hindu religion, may be keeping the same Festival of Light. Maybe doing that. So Hannukah is really the dedication, rededication of the temple after it was messed up by Antiochus Epiphanes, to rededicate it, even as we need to rededicate our own lives. So Daniel is praying. He's praying. And he's told by Gabriel that 70 weeks are determined for thy people, and in so doing they must put away foolishness. That's what 70 weeks are decreed for your people and for your Kodesh city, to put an end to transgression, stop sinning, and to seal up the sins and to cover wickedness, and to bring in everlasting righteousness, and to seal up the vision and Nabi, the prophets, and to anoint the most Kodesh. Know then and understand from the going forth of the command to restore and build Jerusalem unto the Messiah, the Prince is 7 weeks. He's letting you know when the command goes out to rebuild Jerusalem until the birth of the Messiah, there will be 7 weeks. As I indicated before, it's 7 weeks of years. So he's saying 7 times 7 is 49. So the first 49 years, when it starts, will lead you to the birth of the Messiah. And we know historically, when we read the book of Ezra, and we read chapter 6, verse 12, and we read chapter 7, verse 14, we understand that the command to rebuild Jerusalem was in 457 BC. We understand that historically. So we're moving 49, and then we come to the birth of the Messiah. That's what he said. And then after the Messiah, we now count another 62 weeks. But we are told also, by the time we get to 483, because the whole process of time is 490 years. 490 years. 490 years are decreed for the Hebrew people to get it all right. That's what he's saying. This is not what the church is saying. This is what angel came from heaven to tell you. 490 years. And it's all started in 457 BC. To get it right. But we are told that the Messiah was cut off at 483 years, 62 weeks after that first 49 weeks. He was cut off, but not for himself. And he was cut off in the middle of the week. Now, hold it there, because this perhaps is one of the most controversial of topics. And conclusions are like autumn leaves. There's so many. Because some would reason that he was cut off in the middle of the week, meaning that he was cut off in that middle of the 3.5 years. Cut off. But I must deposit a view to you. As we perambulate through Daniel, we must think on this. When was he crucified? Most people would tell me, oh yeah, he was crucified on Friday. He was crucified on Friday. And so, that's why we have Easter and, we indulge ourselves with bun and cheese and hot cross bun and all that. Come on. All that Jeremiah told you not to do, because that's not the way of Yah. So you say, why do you ask that question? Because the word tells us that he was crucified in the middle of the week. On Wednesday. What? What did you say? He was crucified on Wednesday. In that week, there were 2 Sabbaths. There was the annual Sabbath and the weekly Sabbath. And so when he was crucified on Wednesday, which is the preparation day before that day of unleavened bread, the annual Sabbath, which was on a Thursday, could it not be that what the word is saying, that he was cut off in the middle of the week, middle of the literal week, not the prophetic week? You get what I'm saying? Some have concluded that he was cut off in the prophetic week, and I'm saying he's cut off in the middle of the week, literal week, 7-day week. That's when he was cut off. And so he's being told all of this. And so let me just say this. If he was cut off in the middle of the week, which meant that he had only completed the whole process and the program of restoration, had only gotten to 483, then 1 week is left. 1 week is left. But some would argue, no. After the Messiah died, up until the stoning of Stephen, the prophecy was completed. They will tell you that. And so the question is, so if the prophecy is completed, did they attain to righteousness? Did they stop sinning? Did they did all that? Did they do all of that? And the answer is no. Because all of this including the destruction of the temple, was in there. But we know that the temple was not destroyed until 70 AD, which is like 37 years later. So then, Mr. Theologian, how do you factor that in? So let's work on the basis that a week is left, which we call the time of trouble. And that's 7 years. So Gabriel is still going through this. Verse 26, and after 62 weeks, Messiah shall be cut off and have naught, and the people of the coming prince shall destroy the city. The people of Titus who were coming from the Roman general, later became emperor. When he comes, the people, his people, shall destroy the city. And the Kodesh place, and the end of it with a flood, and waste are decreed, and fighting until the end. And he shall confirm a covenant. Who confirms the covenant? Now, this is very, very interesting, because you have a group of people here. Some say this is talking about Titus, and some say, no, this is talking about the Messiah. So who is the Eve? Let's read it again for emphasis. This is why I said it is very controversial, and I indicated that Hannukah is very much rooted in prophecy. If only we can see it. Let's read it again. And after 62 weeks, the Mashiach shall be cut off and have naught, and the people of the coming prince, that's Titus, we know that, shall destroy the city, which was destroyed in 70 AD, and the Kodesh place and the end of it with a flood, and waste are decreed, and fighting until the end, and he shall confirm a covenant with many. Now, it seems grammatically correct. As we move to the next verse, the subject in the previous verse is Titus. And then he says, and he shall confirm a covenant with many for 1 week, and in the middle of the week he shall put an end to the slaughtering of the meal offering. And on the wing of the abomination he shall lay waste, even until the complete end, and that which is decreed is poured out, and one lay waste. So people cannot conclude on who is the he. Here's not this talking about Antiochus, who, when he stopped the people in the temple sacrificing and then set up his idol system, Zeus, is not this it? And another question we need to ask ourselves, Yah said, I never break my covenant. It says here, and he shall confirm a covenant with many for 1 week, and in the middle of the week he shall put an end to the slaughtering. Does Yah break his covenant? It's a thought. And I'm throwing that out for our consideration to see if we can make reasonable sense of that, because if that's not the case and another week is left, then we can understand why a lot of people now are talking about building another temple. Another temple. Because Paul addresses that in a way, and he said in 2 Thessalonians, he said, before the coming of Yeshua, that day will not come until there is a falling away. There's an apostasy that will come first. And the man of sin will come, and he will sit in the temple of Yah, proclaiming himself to be Yah, and he will deceive many people. Could it be that? They're going to build another temple, or not necessarily a temple, but a group of people in a place, and they will worship Yah, and someone will come in the man of sin and sit in that place, and they will believe it's the Messiah. Because right now you have a group of people who don't believe in the Messiah and don't even believe that he had come yet. They're waiting for the first coming while we are waiting for the second coming. Could it that be? And so when he comes and set up his system like Antiochus Epiphanes, many people will join with him, believing that he is the Messiah. Could it be? You see, we have got to be careful. We have got to be careful. It's not all that glitter is gold. That's why the Bible says, gird your loins with truth. And for those people who don't believe in Hanukkah, they don't believe in the feast days, they don't believe in keeping these because their constitutional church, probably I should say constitutional church, tell them that they shouldn't. Come with me as we close this to Yohanan, chapter 10. And I'll read from verse 22. It says, the feast of dedication. The feast of what? This is Hanukkah. Took place at that time in Jerusalem. It was winter. So we know it's in the winter season. And Yeshua was walking in the temple in the porch of Solomon. Yeshua was there at the feast of dedication. Yeshua was there at the feast of dedication. And you who say you follow him, you say you don't keep it. You don't recognize it. It says here, this is the New Testament. He was walking in the porch of Solomon. The Jews therefore surrounded him and were saying unto him, how long holdest thou our lives in suspense? If thou art the Messiah, tell us plainly. Yeshua answered them, I told you, and you believe not. The works which I am doing in the name of my Father, the same bear witness concerning me. By my fruits you know who I am. By your fruits I will know who you are. I know your works. Laodicea, you're neither hot nor you're cold. You're neither hot nor are you cold. I will spew you out. I will spew you out. So on the 25th of December, 167 BC, Antiochus caused the daily sacrifice to cease, where in the place of the heathen altar he brought into the temple. So as we move towards that which they call Christmas, the 25th of December, Ezekiel chapter 8 tells us what happened. Ezekiel calls it, he says, the women, they're weeping for Tammuz. Who's Tammuz? Tammuz is Nimrod's son and Semiramis. So even today, the people are honoring Tammuz, believing that they're celebrating the birth of Yeshua. When Yeshua was born in the 7th month, according to the book of Luke, in the season of tabernacle. The people only a couple of days ago had Thanksgiving in America here. Thanksgiving is in the 7th month, the Hebrew month, the month of tabernacles. There are 3 harvests: barley harvest, Passover; wheat harvest, Pentecost; and the fruit harvest in the Feast of Tabernacle. Now you see, gross darkness is over the land. But you know, I have come and you have come like a night watchman. You know, if I were ever good at anything growing up, it was at cricket. And you have a situation in cricket where when the day is almost finished and the good batsmen, you're trying to save them for the next day to make sure that no more wicket is lost, you would send in a lower order batsman in the night, but you would send him in before his time was due, and you call him a night watchman. And perhaps our generation is that night watchman to make sure that the great batsmen like Abraham and Isaac and Jacob and all those great men, their testimonies will not be destroyed, but we will use it to remind our people of their faith, because faith is the victory. In Yeshua's name I pray. Amen. Amen.